Hello, everybody. I'm Natalie Brunell. Thank you so much for checking out my show, where I get to hear from the leading voices in Bitcoin, financial markets, political structures, philosophy, and more. Please make sure you're subscribed to the show. And if you're watching this on YouTube, like this video so more people see it, and hit that notifications button so you don't miss out on any new content. This podcast does not provide financial advice. It is for educational and entertainment purposes only. So make sure you always do your own research before making any financial decisions and be aware of your risk tolerance. I'm able to produce this show thanks to my sponsors, and I'm very picky about who I choose to partner with. So I hope you'll take the time to listen to the ad reads throughout the show. These are companies that I really believe in the space. I've hand selected them, and I actually use their products and services. I'm also able to produce this show thanks to the support of my listeners and viewers, value for value. So if you'd like to make a donation to help the show grow, you can find my Bitcoin and Lightning wallets in the description. All right, now to my main partner, Swan Bitcoin. Swan is where I do all of my Bitcoin purchases. In fact, I dollar cost average every single day, not every week, not bi-monthly, every single day. And they have the lowest fees in the space. I love Swan Bitcoin because it is a true Bitcoin only company. Swan has a ton of free educational resources on their website, and they now have a mobile app, which I've been using to smash by some Bitcoin. Swan Studios produces my new show, Hard Money, which covers the biggest news in Bitcoin and the global economy. It's like an orange-pilled version of CNBC, so make sure to check that out on YouTube for all the biggest headlines, because we are not afraid to question the mainstream narrative. And Swan Bitcoin is putting on the first and biggest West Coast Bitcoin-only conference, Pacific Bitcoin. It'll be held November 10th and 11th in the LA area with prominent speakers like Michael Saylor, Lynn Alden, and Preston Pish. I'll be an MC, and also I'll be hosting some fireside chats with people like Jeff Booth and Alex Epstein. And if you want to come to the event, you still have time to get tickets. You can get 20% off at pacificbitcoin.com using the code HODL, HODL. Super excited to see you there. It's time for the show. All right. Thanks for joining Coin Stories this week, guys. I'm super excited to be joined by Brett and Harry. They're the hosts of the Meat Mafia Podcast. And this is actually really fun because on Twitter, until recently, you guys had these characters as your profile faces. It wasn't your real pictures. So you're Mr. Solozzo and Clemenza, right?
Yeah.
I want to hear about who you guys actually are, because again, I love putting a name to or a face to a name. So Harry, let's start with you. Who are you and where are you from?
Good question. So I am originally from the Washington, D.C. area, just outside D.C. and Virginia. And Brett and I know each other through college. So we both played baseball together. And growing up, sports was a huge part of my upbringing. Every season was playing one or two sports. So this idea around like performance and nutrition was just kind of like the foundation of kind of my values and my value set, and ended up playing sports in college, played baseball up at Babson College for 2 years. And, after that was put into the working world with a background in finance. And after a few short years of working, that job was just kind of at the end of the road with what I was doing, and wanted to sort of connect with what I was really passionate about. And that was growing more and more closely with this idea around nutrition and what's happening in the food system. And so Brett and I had been signing up for all these races together, started out with like marathons, half Ironmans, and ultimately we ended up signing up for this full Ironman together down in Texas. And we were living together, cooking all of our meals, loving life, preparing for this race, kind of just doing what we love doing. And the moment was right for us to start speaking about some of these topics around nutrition, which we both kind of sort of fell into on accident. But when we look back and connect the dots, it's like, this is what we've been passionate about the whole time, especially like coming from a sports background, really focused on some of these topics around nutrition, and then kind of opening up, our eyes through the nutrition lens on what's happening in the food system, how our food is actually being produced on some of these farms. And then also like some of the narratives that we see out there today that we've kind of grown, increasingly resistant to when it comes to like vegan food products and like new big food. So Yeah, that's kind of the high level view of my life story to where I am right now. But yeah, I'm happy to dive into any of those topics.
Yeah, well, we'll dig into some of those narratives. But so, Brett, how did you end up at that school to meet Harry?
Yeah, it's been a pretty cool just like convergency of everything that we're doing. And I think it's important to note too that like Harry and I met in college and we played college baseball together. That's really how we became friends. And he's a year older than I am. So he graduated 2016, I graduated 2017. And we both kind of had our own separate nutritional journeys that led us to the point where we're on now. For me, I was dealing with some pretty serious stomach issues. When I was 21, I got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune disease in your large intestine, your colon, where basically your stomach gets very inflamed. You can't process the food that you're eating. And as a result of it, like you just go to the bathroom a lot. So it's like a very embarrassing thing, especially for like a young man. We don't really talk about these things. We just hold them in. And then by the time you start to report it to a doctor, it's like you have full-blown colitis and you're very flared up. So it's very similar to like Crohn's or irritable bowel syndrome.
Is it genetic?
That's what's interesting is that they don't exactly know what causes it. Like there's probably a genetic component to it, diet, lifestyle related decisions. It's kind of like a combination of all of those things. And so I do have like a family history of stomach issues, but also I was like very much into that like Western lifestyle in the university where I was an athlete. So I just kind of justified everything that I was eating as just calories to fuel my performance. And, I'm drinking on the weekends. I'm not getting enough sleep. I'm stressed out with baseball. And next thing you know, it's like you have this kind of a bizarre, extremely rare disease for someone that's like quote unquote healthy. And that's what's interesting. So for me, like in 2019, I experimented with a carnivore diet where I basically ate all animal products. So a lot of red meat, chicken, eggs, fish, water. I cooked in butter and ghee and tallow. And the whole theory behind that was that, this standard American diet is incredibly inflammatory with the sugars, the seed oils, all the grains, all the carbohydrates. And animal products, contrary to what we've been told, they're incredibly digestible, they're incredibly nutrient dense, and they're really like evolutionarily what we've been designed to eat. Mm-hmm. So I went on this carnivore journey, had amazing success, literally cleared up all the inflammation in my stomach.
Really?
Got off of all my medication. I was on meds that were costing, it's like $400,000 per year, because that's how expensive some of these drugs are. And we can dig into that. But really for me, that was like my example of being able to heal these quote unquote unhealable conditions through diet and lifestyle. And I think that's really fueled both of our journeys is that, we're not nutritionists, we're not MDs, but we're people that have like kind of put in the 10,000 hours of experimentation. And we've learned just so much about food and diet and lifestyle and, how that can positively or negatively impact, your quality of life.
I love that. Okay. So did you guys just start having these conversations and you both found that you had similar concerns about the current food system and your diets and becoming healthy? And then you decided to just come together and, talk to people and start this podcast? Like, how did that come to be?
Yeah, I think we both had this shared experience about coming back to real food. I think both of us kind of had these struggles with just the food system in general and some of the implications or externalities of just like the abundance of highly processed food and the easy accessibility to cheap, low quality food. And so when we were living together, we were both eating an animal-based diet, like incredibly dialed in on the nutrition front. And so I think the inspiration really was that month period when we were living together, and we kind of just kept sharing these stories and meals of what this like lifestyle has done for both of us. And at that point in time in my life, so I had quit my job 2 months prior. I was working in a real estate investing job and made a hard pivot to start something on my own. I was working on a tech company that was going to be like a secondary income source for farmers to post like their farm stays on this marketplace. And so that was the idea at the time. But knowing that that's what I was doing, I really wanted to get a better lens into what was happening in the food system and what sort of problems these farmers were dealing with. And so I was looking for resources to either connect with, write for, basically do anything for people. So Brett and I were going out to farms and talking to people, trying to like grow this business that was like just trying to take off. And then also writing online. So we started writing online in December, January timeframe. So I was blogging for Texas Slim, who's fairly well known in the Bitcoin space. I was blogging for him for about a month, and Brett and I were still living together at that time. And so during the course of that process, I think Brett and I sort of shared this moment in time where we were both feeling a draw towards this creative side that we had never really expressed or had the outlet to put our creative energy into. And so as soon as we both started writing, it was just this insane amount of momentum that we built up, because it just sparked like the true passion project, which I think both of us had really kind of not really harnessed and like embraced. And that moment in time was unique because as soon as we started writing, we started getting traction, and we were writing on Twitter, not really with any clear direction, but we were putting out great information that was based out of our personal experiences with this diet, this animal-based diet that we have both had so much success with. So, Brett, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
No, I think you covered it perfectly. I think just to reiterate, I think this self-experimentation has been big, and we're two people that have had amazing success, like just kind of taking an internal stake of what's going on and playing around with the food that we've been eating and taking control of the food and cooking our meals, and had such amazing success doing so. And then we started looking into the data of like, we're just not healthy as a society. Like it's very apparent to a lot of people. It's like the statistics speak for themselves. 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. 40% of our children are overweight or obese. 1 in 10 kids have fatty liver disease. So you're like, all right, well, right. And then you start to peel back the curtain a little bit, and you realize that we don't eat food anymore. We eat these like food-like substances out of a box. Into. And I think that whole mission has just really fueled us, is trying to just understand, number one, like, why are we so unhealthy? And number two, what are some practical things that we can be teaching people? How do we teach this like simplified but powerful message to help people, how to empower them and help get them healthy? Because, everyone is capable of doing so by taking control of a few different things in their lives.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I love your messaging and the fact that you're trying to educate people about this, because your pages resonated with me, especially after learning more about fiat and sort of the history of our monetary system and how that's impacted food, especially in the US, and monopolized certain things and created like this soybean and corn and the mass farming industries that are hurting our health. And then you couple that with the healthcare issues and the pharmaceuticals, and we have basically a disaster on our hands. And so I want to dig into some of these food issues, but first I want to ask you guys, what were your diets like when you were younger? Because one of the reasons I think I was compelled to learn more about this is I grew up in the US, but I'm Polish, and my family had a totally different diet than all of my friends. My mom shopped at a Polish, like small deli grocery store, and the things that I would bring would gross people out. I would bring like liver paste, like liverwurst sandwiches. And my friends were all eating Lunchables and Capri Sun. And then I would go home, right? And I would report it back to my mom, and she'd be like, that's junk. Or I'd be like, my friends eat fat free or whatever. And my mom goes, that's a scam. That's a lie. That's terrible for you. And so I was always getting these conflicting messages between what I saw my friends eat and their families eat, and then what my mom would feed me. And now I'm so grateful, because my mom was absolutely right. And my family stayed pretty much like in shape and whatever. And that hasn't happened with a lot of the families that I grew up with. So can you talk a little bit about your diets when you were younger and maybe what you've learned about that?
Yeah, I would say it's such a good question, and it's such an interesting point, because I just talked to one of my friends the other day, and she's an immigrant from the Ukraine, so somewhat of a similar story to you. And she had mentioned how like back in the Ukraine, she was like, they live close to a farm, and she was drinking all this raw milk, and they were cooking all their meals, and she would drink as much milk as she wanted and never had any issues. Now, fast forward 15 years down the road, and she considers herself to be lactose intolerant, which makes so much sense because our milk is pasteurized, and even just the cow is entirely different from what she would get into the Ukraine. So I just thought that was an interesting story. But no, I had amazing parents. I have an Italian mom. She cooked so many of our meals for us. But for me, it was like going to school.
Yeah.
I was like, just a calorie is a calorie and it's going to fuel my performance. So like, I literally remember like playing baseball at a high level, but eating like Pop-Tarts before I would play, or drinking soda, or like having pre-workout before I would hit a lift. And then afterwards I would drink a protein shake with a bunch of like shelf stable additives in it. So, you know, for me, I was always like, oh, well, I'm lifting weights and I'm burning calories, so food is fuel. I wasn't thinking about like nutrient density or really preparing my meals, like really until I graduated and had some of my own health issues. That was really when I started to take health into my own hands. So it's basically a very long-winded way of saying like, I just ate everything that I could, and it definitely fell into the category of like the standard American diet.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Pop-Tarts, cereal, all these things. And you know what's funny? My family always ate butter and lard. Like my dad would cook things in lard, and my friends would be having margarine or Pam cooking spray.
Oh,
And
man.
again, when I was little, I was like, I don't understand, why would it be on the shelf if it was unhealthy? But my mom's like, that's really bad for you, don't buy it. And now here we are, we're learning, and thank God for shows like yours and people that are calling attention to the fact that this stuff is not healthy, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think my story too is very similar to Brett's, where it's like my mom was incredibly well-intentioned. And I think that her intuition around what is food and like what to put on the table was like 100% right. Like we didn't have soda in the house. And I think she was generally focused on eating whole foods. So like it was like 95% of the way there. But I think when you come from a background that's not based in like the standard American diet, it's so much easier to see like what's wrong with a lot of these families and like, or a lot of these families' dietary patterns and like what they're putting on the table. But even the fact of just having someone who's like mindful enough to put together a dinner every night that's cooked is a blessing and like something to be grateful for. So like, I think Brett and I both had that growing up, which is just a huge leg up for us. And I think it made us both very intentional about, you know, what we put in our bodies once we came around to it ourselves with our own health journeys. But, you know, like Brett too, I think that there's a lot of these pitfalls. Like once you get outside of your own home, like at school, I was eating school lunch and it was basically a free for all. And we had this buffet of garbage. It was like subs, chips, chocolate milk, nachos, cookies, pizza on Fridays. Like they're really, you would have to be very, very mindful of what you're eating in the school cafeteria. And like, I don't really think, like thinking back, there were all that many options that were very, very healthy. Right. So yeah, I think it's one of these battles that is just something that we're always going to be needing to be like fighting and just be aware of, and like empowering people through information, because kids eat most of their meals at school, or like a good portion of their meals at school, which is outside the purview of a lot of parents.
Right. And I really think it does start early, the way that you start to shape your body and your diet and what tastes good to you. I think a lot of people are addicted to these fake sugars. And so it's harder to break those patterns because your body's kind of addicted to them. Right. So let's talk a little bit about different types of foods. Let's start with meat. You guys are the Meat Mafia. First of all, why are you the Meat Mafia? And second of all, you know, one day we see a story, red meat's good for you. The next day we don't. And I think there's a lot of conflicting information out there, even in Bitcoin, because the Bitcoiners, there are some that are so passionate about the carnivore diet that they say literally that is all you should eat. It should just be red meat. It doesn't matter if you're a guy, girl, what your background is. And then others are a little bit more, you know, flexible and loose with their diet, but they say it should be primarily meat. I've heard, you know, how bad our chicken is these days, especially with antibiotics. So let's start with, why are you the Meat Mafia? And then tell us about red meat and why it's good for you and how big of a portion of your diet it should be.
Yeah, it's funny. We initially started off as the Food Mafia, and we thought that Meat Mafia had a little bit of a buzz to it. So that's part of the reason why. So you have the Meat Mafia, but I mean, meat has been a big reason why we've kind of like been able to reclaim our health. It's very important to both of us. And meat is something that we feel is just very unjustly demonized, right? It's like I remember when I first started a carnivore diet in 2019, I almost had to rewire what a real plate of food looked like, because I remember cooking a ribeye for the first time. And I think I had a couple eggs with it and thinking to myself, is this literally going to kill me? Am I going to have a heart attack by eating all red meat? Because I've been so conditioned by almost 50 plus years of dogma, because we've really, as a society, we have this aversion to saturated fat, to cholesterol. And it's a lot of unfounded dogma based off of a hypothesis from Ansel Keys in the 50s that's really shaped the way that we think about food. But when you start to go down the rabbit hole, you realize that red meat is some of the most nutrient dense food that you can possibly put into your system. We just don't understand because we think that red meat doesn't sit well, but most people are eating red meat in the form of like a processed hamburger, or they're having fries on the side cooked in canola oil and having like a hot fudge sundae with it, or soda like you talked about. But when you really make the effort to cook these nutrient dense foods in the form of animal protein with really good quality cooking fats, you know, we found through our own anecdotal research and experimentation, it sits incredibly well in your stomach. It calms your gut down. It helps you build the body, the physique that you want, and it's improving your metabolic health overall. So a lot of our brand has been teaching people about what real food actually is, and real nutrient dense animal protein is such a valuable part to that. So that's a big reason why we wanted to call ourselves the Meat Mafia. And then also Harry talks about this all the time, almost having that like mafia mentality of taking down big food, because
I like that.
Yeah, these companies are so pervasive. I mean, a statistic that we talk about all the time that we've taken from the documentary Food Inc. is that when you go into the average grocery store, there's about 33,000 products in that grocery store, but really they're controlled by about 10 publicly traded companies, right?
Yeah, I've seen that chart where it boils down how food companies, and
it's eye-opening, right? Because you're going through the inner aisles of the grocery store trying to shop for your family, and you see all these different boxes, these colorful packages, different brand names, but there's really an illusion of choice with that because they're controlled by these 10 different companies that are really just playing around with corn, wheat, soy, seed oils, refined sugar to create basically an addictive product like you talked about, with all these different flavor combinations. And we as the consumer are the ones that are suffering from that, because we're not environmentally designed to create those foods. We're meant to eat real foods, which are, you know, we view real foods to be meat, fish, eggs, fruits, vegetables, you know, some raw dairy, some raw honey. I know that can get controversial in the carnivore community, but it's really just like the mafia mentality is trying to escape from this corporatization of food that's occurred, and try and help people reclaim their health and understand that.
Can you guys shed a little bit more light for those who aren't familiar about what happened with this flippening to say that those types of foods, red meat, real animal fats, are actually bad for you, that they'll cause cholesterol, that you're going to get a heart attack if you eat too many of those, and all of a sudden it was in favor of what I would consider more processed foods, and almost like artificial ingredients are more okay and seen as health foods as opposed to actual animal proteins?
Yeah, so Brett touched on it a little bit, and Brett, feel free to chime in. But when Eisenhower was president, he suffered a heart attack that got the attention of the US and the entire world. And essentially, he got everyone's attention steered towards what we are eating, and is it causing this spike in heart disease? Because at the time, that's what everyone was talking about. Everyone was worried about what was happening with this increase in heart disease, which I think now we can objectively look at and say, oh, this can be tied back to smoking, which it is a massive risk factor for people who, suffer cardiovascular conditions. So he suffered a heart attack, and at the time, everyone's trying to figure out what exactly to do and how to actually, appropriately put together dietary guidelines around what the proper food is to eat. And so there was a man by the name of Ansel Keys who came out with a 7-country study. And essentially what he did was he went to 21 countries, studied these different populations, what they were eating, what foods were, nutritious, what foods were incorporated in their diet, what foods weren't. And he boiled it down to 7 countries. He basically cherry-picked 7 countries out of the 21 that he studied and created a correlation between red meat and heart disease. And so that is basically the backdrop of what then became the food pyramid, which then became all these different products and things that people think are food, but aren't. Like 12 servings of grains and those sorts of products then became the norm. Where if you look at a menu from 1905, you could clearly see that most of the foods that people were eating back then were centered around animal protein and animal products. So that's a huge part of it. But one of the things that I talk about a decent amount is this invisible hand of the incentives that was kind of playing a key role after World War II. So after World War II, the U.S. was in a really unique position. We hadn't really been a global player at that point. And so I think our interests were to secure more global power. And we had a huge excess amount of ammonium, which could then be turned into fertilizer after the war. And so that fertilizer actually ended up being used, all across the Midwest to support new programs that were funneling money towards raising and growing corn, wheat, and soy. And so with the government steering money and dollars towards corn, wheat, and soy, and having the resources to extract a ton of yield from the farmland in the US, which really, like, that was in 1945, like, our biggest resource was the soil in the US. It was so rich, like, loaded with organic matter, and it was just able to grow all these crops very easily. But we've totally abused that through the system of synthetic fertilizers.
Yeah.
And so over the next decades, this supporting and propping up of the synthetic fertilizer industry, these commodity crops, that was basically the toolbox to create all of these other products that are then either patentable or able to be protected by large corporate interests and sold to the market that has the U.S. dietary guidelines telling people that grain and pastas are the right thing to eat.
Right.
There's like kind of this combination of like policy shifting, like what we were growing in the country, but also the guidelines saying, hey, this is like the right thing to be eating. So it was a double-edged sword, and really this like perfect storm for what happened to our food system and healthcare system.
Yeah, I see both of you have shared things about our soil and the fact that we have really depleted it of so many of the nutrients. And what's interesting is, going back in history, you didn't have a certain type of food all year round, right? I mean, they're seasonal, and there's a season and the soil has to replenish itself, and then you grow it again. But here, or in the US and around the world, we just grow everything year round, and we kind of force it, right? Is that what, folks are not aware of?
Yeah, we don't really understand the concept of seasonality. It's like I think a lot of what we talk about is just this fact that we've really lost our connection with our food, right? It's like you're used to being able to go in a grocery store and get avocados, strawberries, blueberries, oranges, peaches all year round. You're used to going to the grocery store and being able to get almost any cut of meat that you want. You have no idea where it comes from. That meat could be imported from Brazil or Argentina or Mexico, but labeled as like US pasture-raised beef. Like, we've just kind of we've really just lost the connection of where our food has come from. And it's really our health and these poor incentives that are really like at the root cause of a lot of it. So, it's something that we really want to draw attention to and really teach people kind of a way to push back to that, which is learning how to connect with a local farmer or rancher in the community, where you can really verify the way that the way that the animals raise, the way that they're growing their fruits and their vegetables, making sure they're not sprayed with these herbicides and pesticides and things like glyphosate, like really just ensuring that best quality product for you and your family. Because unfortunately right now, like, because of the commercialization of food that Harrison has talked about, you really just don't have any way to verify where it comes from when you're buying in the grocery store.
We're going to take a quick break from the show to hear these messages from my sponsors. First up, iTrustCapital. Do you save in Bitcoin for your retirement in your IRA? iTrustCapital allows you to invest in Bitcoin and other digital assets with the tax benefits of an IRA. And unlike the stock market, you can buy and sell 24 hours a day. Instead of paying taxes on Bitcoin gains every year, you can defer taxes using an iTrust crypto IRA, or with an iTrustCapital Roth IRA, you can withdraw tax-free at retirement. iTrust recently hit a milestone of $6 billion in total transactions across the platform, and that's $6 billion in tax-advantaged accounts that those 87,000 new IRS agents can't do anything about. The iTrustCapital platform is easy to use and only takes a few minutes to set up. And if you want to start investing with a $100 bonus, head to iTrust.capital/Natalie Brunell. Next up, let's talk about Bitcoin 2023. That is the biggest Bitcoin conference in the world. And take a look at the video from last year in Miami. It was an incredible event that was jam-packed with the best speaking sessions, workshops, and networking events that I've been to in the space. I had the chance to live anchor the Bitcoin Magazine news desk and serve as MC. And it was such a full circle moment for me to be at that conference because the first one I attended was Bitcoin 2021 in Miami. And that's where I actually launched the Coin Stories podcast. I went on a media pass because I used to be a reporter, and I actually went backstage and started asking the speakers like Michael Saylor and Preston Pysh if they would come on my show. And they did. And a year later, I'm back at the conference as someone who actually has a career now in Bitcoin. So you never know what can happen at these events. I highly recommend going so you can meet other people that share the same values and passion for Bitcoin. And if you want your ticket at a 10% discount, head to b.tc/conference and use the code HODL, HODL. I'll see you there.
One of the things that we find as an interesting parallel with meat is that all the criticisms of meat or a lot of the similar ones, like it's bad for the environment, it's bad for your health. Like there are similar ones being made for Bitcoin. And the environmental one is one that I think is really misunderstood. And so you mentioned the soil. Ruminant animals play a critical role in restoring soil health and organic matter into the soil. And environmentalists are now taking to the claim that cows should be. So the Beyond Beef CEO is on record saying that he would snap his fingers to eliminate all the cows from the face of the earth. Like they're going to that extreme to say that we don't need cows in our ecosystems. And I think it's just patently wrong. And they're coming at it from the environmental perspective. And there's been studies done on this, specifically at White Oak Pastures, which is really a pioneering farm down in Georgia. And Will Harris and his team got a carbon life cycle study done, which basically showed that they were net carbon negative and actually good for the environment. So these cows that they're using to intensively graze on their land are actually providing a service to these environmentalist cause. But the narrative in the mainstream is that cows are bad for the environment. So that's another reason why we're so passionate about this. Like there's all these different narratives that are being plugged in everywhere, and like no one really knows like what they're basing this stuff off of. But when you kind of like peel back the facts, it's like, of course, cows are important for the environment. Like they're part of the environment.
Yeah.
And so they play a key role in putting those nutrients back into the soil.
Got it. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the incentive systems that Brett mentioned, because I think that digs into some of the things Bitcoiners are trying to fix with sound money. And obviously, Harrison, with your background in finance, you might have an interesting perspective as well. But what are these broken incentive structures within the food system, and how difficult are they to change so that the food system is more healthier for all of us?
Yeah, it's a good question. And Harrison, we could probably tag team this one, but
Yep.
I think something that Bitcoiners are rightfully passionate about that we've seen through the show is just the overall centralization that we've allowed to occur. So we were touching on the fact that, it's about 10 companies that are controlling 33,000 products in the grocery store, but that centralization goes even beyond just the products in the inner aisle of the grocery store. Like if we want to focus on meat in particular and some of the demonization that it's getting, a lot of that's come as a result of the centralization in the beef industry. So there are about 4 beef packers, and the packer is the person that's actually doing the slaughtering and the processing of the animal. They control about 85% of all beef that's found in the grocery store. So pretty much if you're buying something in the grocery store, it's going to be touched by these packers. And as a result of that, they're basically able to undercharge the rancher that's actually raising the cow and sending them off to get slaughtered. They can undercharge them and they can overcharge you, the consumer. So it's like, I would say that pre-COVID, when I was in New York City, I would say the average cost of a ribeye was like $18 to $19 per pound. And now when you go into the grocery store, it's like not uncommon, even like a Costco or somewhere that's like almost like a wholesale store, to be paying close to $30 a pound per ribeye. And they really have the flexibility and the ability to do that because they've created almost like a monopoly over our beef supply. So, I mean, Harry, we can probably take that to other aspects of the food system, but like that's something that immediately comes to mind for me when we think about centralization. That's really like hurting the overall end product of what we're taking in as food.
Yeah. And one of the things I was going to add to that, so something I spend a decent amount of time thinking about is who stands to lose the most if the current existing food system were to change, and it's all these big players, right? And so 60% of the government subsidized corn, wheat, and soy goes and funnels back into feedlot agriculture. And so when we're looking at like which systems do we want to support, there's feedlot agriculture and monocrop agriculture, which I think both can be articulated as like the common enemy of like long-term human health. But if you look at the system, 60% of government incentives for corn, wheat, and soy are going back. So that's the monocrop agriculture. That's funneling into feedlot agriculture, which is then supporting what Brett's talking about, which is these 4 big packers who basically control the mass market for beef. And then when you look at the other side of the equation, the monocrop agriculture side of things, you're talking about agrochemical businesses like, Bayer, Monsanto, all these big players, and also the seed genetic businesses, which both of those, the top 4 companies in both of those industries are the same companies, and they both own over 60% of the market share for both of those industries. So this industrialization of food has been completely captured by a few small players, and they're the ones who are trying to steer the incentives towards highly processed foods, not real foods. Like small farms don't have a marketing budget. These big companies do, and they're trying to steer every dollar that you spend towards the system that makes them profit. So
yeah, no, it's really sad because it's like, how does a small rancher or farmer even capture enough of a customer base, because they have to charge more because they're taking care of the animals. And especially with today, how expensive everything is, people go to the grocery store and they don't think about it. And they might just see that like organic sign and just be like, yeah, I'm good. But speaking of that, how healthy or unhealthy is the meat that we're getting at a grocery store? Because with 4 packers and 85% of the supply basically controlled by very few entities, what are these cows eating? Because I know that it's important. The whole food chain is important, right? What they're eating and what the thing that they're eating ate and all of that. And even down to, I'm European, and I love how in Italy, I went once and I talked to, a butcher, and it's like the way that you kill the cow matters, because if you kill them in a way that spooks them, like they release adrenaline or a chemical, and then their meat is kind of more toxic. And so there's all these things about really caring for the product and the cow and the animal all the way until the end, because it matters, and they are fueling you. You're taking in the meat, and whatever that cow, how it was treated, kind of goes into your system, right? So how healthy is the meat in our stores?
Yeah, it's a go ahead, Harry.
I was just going to say, you touched on a really great point, Natalie, which is animal husbandry is incredibly important. And through all the podcasts that we've done with a lot of ranchers who are doing things the right way, they just always emphasize raising these animals in line with nature, how nature intended them to be raised. And those animals, like humans, if we eat a species appropriate diet, we are healthier. And the same thing goes for those animals. So some of the conversations that we've had with people, doing a lot more research on the data behind what the difference is. Like we had a guy on named Stefan Van Fleet who works out of Utah State, and he's really focused on this idea between grain-fed and grass-fed beef and the nutritional differences between the two. And a lot of times we try to oversimplify things when it comes to food, but when he's looking at the details, which is the micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals that actually show up in a grass-fed cow's beef, it is different. And there are different nutritional benefits to eating grass-fed. But that being said, eating grain-fed beef is still better than a lot of alternatives out there. So it's like, you kind of need to play this game of like, yes, there's probably like a perfect way to be eating, but also, we need a range here for a number of different factors, like, economics, like people just have, are coming at it from a different socioeconomical lens. They can't buy hundreds of pounds of ground beef like Brett and I. So there's definitely different ways to looking at it. But I think that one of the things we try to say is like, there's a range here, and grass-fed beef is obviously on the far end of being the best.
Okay. Talk to me about soy and corn, because you look at the ingredient list and corn syrup is on pretty much everything. I think in Bitcoin, some people, have this meme online of soy boys. A lot of people are replacing regular milk with oat milk and soy milk. So what do we need to know about soy and milk, since those are some major crops that I think have infiltrated our food systems?
Well, if you're talking about milk, I mean, we don't even call it soy milk. We just call it soy swill, because it's really not milk. It's this product that we've kind of we've engineered to replace dairy, because we have this aversion. We have this really bizarre aversion to dairy. And that's something that we've talked a lot about on the show, where it's like, a lot of people think that they're lactose intolerant, but really they're lactose intolerant because they're drinking this like pasteurized product from these industrial Holstein cows. And so when you pasteurize milk, you're heating it up to kill a lot of the bad bacteria. And that was necessary because in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, these industrial dairies were absolutely filthy. So the best thing that we could do is we could heat up the milk and pasteurize the milk. The problem is that when you're heating up and pasteurizing the milk, you're also killing off a lot of the good bacteria and the digestive enzymes.
Yeah.
So lactase is actually the enzyme that is helping us digest the milk, and we kill that off when we're pasteurizing our milk, which is why a lot of people think that they're lactose intolerant. It's not that they're necessarily lactose intolerant. It could be because the lactase is being destroyed, and that's inhibiting their ability to digest lactose. So we've both personally found that when we experiment with things like raw milk, and either in the form of raw milk or kefirs or yogurts, we digest those things incredibly well. And we almost get like a surge of energy from it, because, it's loaded with fat soluble vitamins. It's got a lot of great digestive enzymes, but there are so many people that think that have this aversion to dairy because they're not eating or consuming dairy in its natural state. So instead, they're being told, hey, well, why don't I have almond milk, or why don't I have soy milk or something like that? And, some of these big companies out there like Oatly and a few others, they have massive marketing budgets. They're almost run like tech companies where they have hundreds of millions of dollars of VC-backed funding. Exactly. So they're kind of able to put these elaborate marketing campaigns behind their product. And us as the end consumer, we subconsciously think that these things are environmentally and nutritionally healthier for us, which neither of which are true. Harry, I forget that guest that you just hosted on the show that talks a lot about estrogen and how soy can affect those things. But
Anthony, his name's Anthony J, and he wrote a book called Estrogeneration, which is a fascinating topic. He talks about all the different environmental estrogenics, also estrogenics in our food system. And he talks about the fact that eating soy does cause this estrogenic effect in the body. And, not to mention there's
increases like feminization in men. Is that it reduces masculinity?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're about to release that episode, but he kind of breaks it down into a few different categories, but it goes so far beyond food. It's like things that are in our water, things that are getting sprayed on the crops that we eventually either consume through the food that those crops are made out of, or the runoff water from that farm, eventually ends up in our water supply, and we're consuming like micro amounts of these estrogenic chemicals from all these different agrochemical businesses. So, there's a lot of different things out there that he talks about that, are these estrogenic chemicals that end up in our food system or environment, and that we're just not paying nearly enough attention to.
And corn syrup's really bad for you, right? It's like a cheap way to sweeten things, but we should try to avoid it.
Yeah, it's just a cheap substitute. And I think like it was easier and cheaper to grow corn because it was massively subsidized by the government. And then from that, they could just highly process that corn into high fructose corn syrup, and then put that into thousands and thousands of products to get marketed to, whether it be cereals or, healthy bars or whatever they are. And, you read the label and it says total sugar 10 grams, but that sugar is actually coming from the corn plant that's highly processed. So definitely avoid.
Well, go ahead.
No, the only thing I was going to say, Natalie, is that it brings up a good point, because you had mentioned earlier how there's kind of this like contentiousness in the Bitcoin community around diet, where it's like there are these purebred carnivores that are like red meat, salt water, and they'll like live and die on the hill all day long, which makes sense. But it's something that Harry and I have spent a lot of time thinking about, because when we initially started writing on Twitter, like we were pretty dogmatic into the carnivore space. And we've almost changed our tune where it's like, you should never rely on me or you or anyone to just give you blanket health advice. Like a lot of what we're talking about is it's so important to do the self-experimentation and figure out what ratios of foods really work for you. Like my stomach is so sensitive that there are times where I need to go red meat, salt, bone broth, and water. And that's the best way to get my stomach out of some type of a flare up. But if you have a gut that is healthy, why not experiment with some fruits or some vegetables or some honey or some dairy and see if maybe those things can help you? Because there are some people that incorporate those foods and they're thriving. So it's not, we can't say that those things don't work, because for a lot of people they do. It's like, there's just a lot of different ways to skin the cat, whether it's paleo, keto, carnivore, pescatarian. For us, we're more concerned about getting you off of this like industrialized food system.
Yeah.
And have you start to cook your meals and experiment. And over time, you'll figure out, what approach makes the most sense for you. And it's probably going to change a few times over the last couple of years too. Like, don't be so dogmatic to be like, oh, I can only eat red meat and salt. Like, why would you not try and mix in some other things and see how that works for you too?
No, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I tried the carnivore diet actually earlier this year. And for me, it was really difficult. And I don't know why, but my gut instinct tells me that I don't think for a woman, it's actually the right thing. I think we need some carbohydrates and some variety in there. And I did lose weight, but I was really cranky. And I think a woman should have some meat on her, some fat. Yeah. And I was wondering kind of, because so I'm Polish, and Polish, go back generations. We eat potatoes, we eat cabbage, and these types of foods are super easy for me. I can eat them all day long, and they don't bother my stomach, nothing. And I've always kept a good, I think, level of fitness and health and weight by eating those foods, which are not on the carnivore diet. And going back to what you said earlier about Ansel, going to these 7 regions, I studied a couple of years ago, the blue zones, how this guy went to places where people are living the longest, including Sardinia in Italy, a place in Greece, somewhere in Japan, actually Loma Linda, California, which isn't too far from me. And he, looked at their diets, and they weren't primarily just red meat or carnivore. They actually had things like pasta and rice. So, with all that information out there, it's interesting that you said experimentation, because could some of your diet and lifestyle have to do with your evolution and just your own background, where you come from culturally and ethnically?
I think that's where the science is heading. I think people are starting to get a little bit more dialed in when it comes to personal diet, and then like, what is the species appropriate diet for my lineage and my genetics? I don't think there's a lot of great information out there in terms of like studies or anything significant to point to. But the people who are most focused on this in this nutrition space, I think, are definitely knocking on the door of like, hey, you might not be able to eat the same foods as someone who's grew up across the world, because their diet was just incredibly different than what you were raised on. So I think the science is like still yet to come around to it, but the people who are thinking about it are absolutely of the belief that there's probably a little bit more nuance to it.
Yeah, there's a great book, to Harry's point, called Wired to Eat by Rob Wolf. And one of the things that's amazing about it is it actually gives you a carb sensitivity test that you can do with like a cheap continuous glucose monitor that will monitor your blood sugar. And you can experiment with things like white rice versus brown rice and sweet potato, white potato. And you can basically determine how well your body processes certain carbs. So that book, Wired to Eat, it gives you the exact test of what to do. That way you actually have the data to understand how well your body processes those things. And then I think too, like I think a worthwhile investment is for someone to take like a week to 2 weeks and just to keep a food journal, like literally just make a log of what are you eating? When are you eating it? And then how do you feel?
Yeah.
Does your energy level feel good? Does your stomach get upset? Do you feel the urge to go to the bathroom? And the beautiful thing about it is that it's so simple, but you start to pick up these patterns. So for me, when I was going carnivore, a lot of people have learned that these dark leafy greens, these like cruciferous vegetables, Brussels sprouts, spinach, kale, etc., they don't actually digest incredibly well. They're loaded in oxalates, and it's just rough on the gut to digest. And I started noticing that when I would eat steak with broccoli or something like that, I would feel like bloated. I wouldn't feel as good as I possibly could feel. And then I cut a lot of that out of my diet.
Wow.
And I noticed that my stomach, my symptoms immediately started to improve. But
Everyone eats kale here.
yeah,
I don't like
so
kale.
no, it's meant to be a garnish. It's not actually meant to be consumed. But, you know, it's like in New York or LA, you see people going into Sweetgreen and paying $20 for this glyphosate sprayed kale salad that was never meant to be
Crazy.
consumed. And they think that they're being healthy just due to, you know, I think a lot of it's just misinformation, unfortunately.
Is the organic label BS? Is it still getting sprayed with stuff to avoid the bugs? And is it actually healthier?
It's definitely healthier. I do think that there's a lot of greenwashing that happens, and like originally the original organic label was much more high integrity, and now organic is basically on everything that's not sprayed with the main herbicides, pesticides. But I mean, it is healthier, but to the degree that it's like the exact right thing to be eating, I would say you're better off going to your local farmer and making sure that they're not spraying on, you know, their garden, spraying Roundup on their garden, and going to them and sourcing for your own beef, because going directly to the source is really the only way to know all the inputs and everything that's going on with what's happening with the food that you're consuming.
I know that this might be a little bit of a rabbit hole, so we don't have to go too deep, but are our bodies changing? Are young people's hormones changing? Because we do see, I mean, you can attribute it to, of course, a lot of different factors, including our monetary system, I think, and culture at large, but we do see more, I would argue, feminine men, more masculine women, you know, things happening with women's bodies, men's bodies. Is there something to it that relates specifically to the corruption of our food system?
It's such a good question. And I mean, I think the data speaks to the fact that, I mean, this isn't a conspiracy theory. I mean, testosterone rates in men are the lowest that they've been in recorded history in addition to the sperm count too. I think it's like 60% of sperm in Western men are gone.
Why?
I mean, our theory is that we don't eat real food, and we don't live the way that nature intended. It's like, you know, we sit inside all day absorbing blue light. We're exposed to all these estrogenics, like Harry talked about. We're eating fake food-like substances. We're working jobs that we don't actually want to be eating. You know, we're not actually out getting sunlight, setting our circadian rhythm, eating real foods, like hunting, having connection with our loved ones and our tribe. Like, society is basically devoid of that. And, you know, you can say what you want, but it's like, I know the feelings of like being sick because of diet and lifestyle. I know the feelings of like having low testosterone. And then I also know, hey, once I started experimenting with these things and changing the way that I was living, the way that I was eating, the way that I was interacting with people, I've become the healthiest that I've ever been. Like, I literally notice a difference in my physiognomy. I even see it with a lot of women where 28, 29, we're starting to be in that generation where women that we went to school with are starting to get pregnant. And I'm noticing anecdotal people are having issues getting pregnant now. It's not just this thing where, like, with ancestral women, they would spend months and even years preparing to get pregnant and incorporating these nutrient dense foods like oysters and raw dairy. Like, we don't think about that. We just take our women off birth control and don't question why they have this difficulty getting pregnant. It's just really interesting to think through.
Oh, I'm very passionate about that topic because fertility levels are dropping. It's like, and in your 30s, you should be able to have a child. And so many of my friends have had issues, and I'm so grateful. I've never been on birth control, the pill, because I'm worried. And I was always worried that it would affect my ability to have a healthy baby or get pregnant. Yeah.
And I think, you know, back to Brett's point, it's like, there's a lot of conjecture on this conversation of like, are people changing? And I don't think you have to look much further than childhood obesity rates. It's like, kids are just so much less healthy than they were just a few decades back. And I do think that we're at a point in time where if we don't start making these types of changes, we're going to see an entire generation of people having these problems that you guys are speaking to around fertility and basically our core evolutionary trait, which is to reproduce, which is, I mean, if there's a canary in the coal mine about where we are in terms of like sounding the alarm with this health crisis, that should be it. We are losing our ability to procreate.
Yeah, that's scary. That's definitely a wake up call. How does Bitcoin fit into all of this? Do you think that by fixing the money, we could somehow restructure the incentive systems and fix the food?
Yeah, I think what we're passionate about when it comes to the idea of fixing the food and fixing the money comes in this form of, instead of trying to fix what's already broken, build what could then become the future that people then kind of flock to once they realize that this other way of living, this new sort of society built upon Bitcoin and sound money can facilitate. And so I think really high quality food is kind of the next base layer on top of sound money, in terms of building a strong and healthy society that flourishes. And I think once you start thinking about it in that way, it's like, we can spend all of our time and effort trying to fix the policy and incentives in Washington, D.C. around food, but to what end? And or we can go out and try to just steer the incentives towards this entirely new monetary system that supports the proper incentives in putting sound money in the pockets of people who are doing things the right way when it comes to creating good, high quality food, restoring soil health and habitats for all these animals that they're that are on their land, that they're supporting the life of. So I look at it through that lens, like build the world that you want to be a part of and let everyone else follow.
We're going to take another quick break to hear these messages from my sponsors. First up, Fold. Fold is the best Bitcoin rewards debit card and shopping app in the world. You can earn Bitcoin on everything you purchase, from Amazon to your groceries, with Fold's Bitcoin cashback debit card, and win free Satoshis every day, or even a whole Bitcoin by spinning the daily wheel and the purchase rewards wheels. I actually have an alarm set every single day so that I never miss out on spinning the daily wheel and earning free sats. And, I have to say that Fold is one of the best ways to get someone completely new into Bitcoin, because they can start earning it and learning about it and using it. So if you want to sign up and join the fun, head to foldapp.com/Natalie for 5,000 in free sats. All right, now I want to tell you about a company called CrowdHealth, which is a Bitcoin-enabled alternative to health insurance. Because let's be honest, health insurance sucks. The government and insurance companies have jacked up prices. They've made things super complex. And when you send your money in, it essentially goes into the health insurance black hole, and then you never see it again, even if you don't get sick and you don't need medical services because, you don't eat fiat foods. But then if you actually do get sick or you need care, you have to send them more money because something ends up not being covered. The great news is there's now an alternative brought to you by Bitcoiners, and it is called CrowdHealth. It is very different from insurance. Instead of sending your hard-earned money to an insurance company, you hold your money in an account that CrowdHealth helps you set up. And you can even convert the dollars in your account to Bitcoin. Now, the company is all about community. Remember, it's called CrowdHealth. So when someone in the community is in need, needs care, needs help, you can choose to actually use the money in your account to help them, or you can keep it in your account. And if you ever leave CrowdHealth, you can take the money that's left with you. If you want to learn more and sign up, you can head to joincrowdhealth.com/Natalie. Now back to the show. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think we have to go back smaller and go local, which you guys, I love that you're really encouraging that and finding small farms and ranches that people can support and uplift. Because at the core for me, the reason I think Bitcoin can address this is our system right now, especially with artificially low interest rates, allows for capital to go to these massive corporations that control our food supply. And then they can take out cheap, financing and loans, and they can continue to get bigger and bigger at the expense of everybody else. Whereas if they now have to play in this more competitive meritocratic system, then if their product sucks and, there are other people that are able to create value on a smaller scale, I think that we would have actually a more evenly distributed and fair and competitive food, I don't know, option or system in general. We would have more variety and options that are based on what's around you and what's good and what's seasonal. That would be a beautiful world, wouldn't it? Like we can make that happen.
Oh, 100%. And it's a return to these these traditions, right? Where it's like, maybe we probably did get a lot of things right in the past that we've unfortunately moved away from, like a world where you have one beef processor per county, as opposed to these massive packers that are just, your beef could be from Argentina and then it's getting processed in California and then it's getting shipped to you in New Jersey. That's so unnatural. And there could be, 80 plus different touch points. But if you want to talk about like Bitcoin directly affecting the food that we're eating, Harry and I love to talk about the story of Amos Miller that got a lot of attention a few months ago. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all, or know who he is. This would actually be something this would be interesting for you to dig into in the show, because he is an Amish farmer out in, I think it's Bellingham, Pennsylvania. So that's Amish country out there. And he has a private membership association where people will pay money and he will send you products from his farm. So his whole theory is that because he's Amish, he's creating products as nature intended. So, meat, raw milk, eggs, cheeses, all these different amazing real foods. And he sends them directly to you through part of his private membership association. And as part of making food as God intended, he doesn't want to touch it with anything. So like a lot of times when you're going through a USDA processor or you're in a grocery store, the meat has to be sprayed with like citric acid or a few other different chemicals and additives. He is not listening to that because his FDA members, or his private membership members, they want food as God intended. That's their right to do that. So they're buying from him and trusting him that he's not going to touch it with anything.
Oh, wow.
The USDA is saying that he is violating their laws and their red tape and their regulations. And so he's now in a lawsuit. I think they've seized like $300,000 from him. They seized his property. And it's a very interesting case, because if he loses that, that's basically determining the fact that like you have to, as a consumer, you have to go through the bureaucracy, the
red tape. Yeah.
100%. It's like, do they really have your best interest in mind, or do they just have these systems and protocols that we need to adhere to? I think it's just a very interesting thing to answer. And not that Bitcoin would necessarily save him, but you imagine if he did have this asset that no one knew about, that was pretty much untouchable, because seizing $300,000, God knows what that's going to do to his operation. So it's just interesting to think about Bitcoin, even in that context of like just sovereignty and personal property. And that kind of is a convergence with us as the consumer. So it's interesting.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting. It's really nice to see that you guys are so hopeful that this could actually get better, because you're up against, huge corporations and conglomerates and this massive monopoly. But there are so many people on the ground level, grassroots. You go to these conferences, you go to these ranches. There are people that are actively working to try to make this better so that people have the option to eat really, really healthy foods that start with animals that are cared for and that, could be the base layer of your diet, right?
Yeah. And, you mentioned that, we're hopeful about the change. I don't really think we have a choice, because we're in a really tough predicament right now with the food system, especially or particularly in the US, where most farmers are aging out of their working years. The average age of a farmer is like mid-60s.
Wow.
And so I think there is this renaissance happening where there's a lot of people who are being inspired by this idea of returning to better ways of creating food, building community, local, and just restoring high quality food to local communities. And it's really, I don't think much of like a hopeful thing. It's really like, we need to make this happen, or otherwise we're going to be captured by industrialized food, which we know is just a conveyor belt down the industrialized line: industrialized food, industrialized healthcare.
Yeah. Well, we haven't touched on that yet. The pharmaceutical component, because it's like the food makes you sick, and then you need the drugs that basically keep you sick, in my opinion. Can you talk a little bit about that component? And do you try to focus a little bit of your work on educating people on the fact that maybe they should try more holistic and natural cures and remedies, as opposed to just going for the pharmaceutical drugs?
Yeah. I would say that we're really in the alternative health space. There's a great podcast that just came out. Joe Rogan just had Will Harris, who Harry mentioned. He owns White Oak Pastures. It's an unbelievable 3-hour conversation. And it's basically like a master class for anyone that wants to learn more about, regenerative agriculture and the industrialized food system. And he mentioned how a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, they will sell, I think he called it bullets and Band-Aids. And I think Bayer is a perfect example of that, where you have like arguably the biggest pharmaceutical company in the world selling these industrialized, pharmaceutical solutions. And then they also own Monsanto, which has like an 80% monopoly over all the seed, the actual food. So you have pharmaceutical companies that are literally controlling our food. So regardless of incentives, if you want to say it's, evil actors at foot, or it's just kind of like a byproduct of the system that we're in and capitalism, it's like there is some type of a conflict from interest that's occurring there. And I mean, for us, you look at both Harrison and I, we both had amazing experiences leaning into alternative medicine and healing these things that were quote unquote incurable. And that's the whole reason why I even went down this rabbit hole in the first place, is that when I first started Googling carnivore, there were all these people that had autoimmune diseases. There's 25 million Americans that have autoimmune diseases. And a lot of people were talking about healing their eczema, their psoriasis, their IBS, losing 50 to 100 plus pounds by experimenting with the food that they're putting into their system. And we've really just gotten away from that. And, we encourage people to be the CEO of their own health and not just blanket do everything that your doctor says to do. Experiment with these different lifestyle measures and start cooking your meals and experiment with your ingredients before you just blanket take a pill.
Completely.
It's just something we're passionate about.
I had a personal experience actually when I went to grad school. I started to have really bad stomach aches, and I went. The normal doctors, they all said the same thing. They couldn't figure out why I was having them, but B, it was going to be like, take a medicine, take some sort of whatever. We could try all these different tests, and then I went to a doctor who was an alternative, like a holistic, osteopathic doctor, and she goes, I think you're stressed out. I think you're in grad school and you're stressed. And I think the stress, some people manifest their stress in back pain, and some people get migraines or headaches. I think for you, it's manifesting in your stomach. I'm going to, let's look at your diet, and why don't you try acupuncture? Acupuncture is a good way to, release some of that. I started going to acupuncture like once a week. I changed up my diet. I incorporated some more teas and just healthy foods. Bam, gone. Problem gone. Also, when I left grad school, it was like really gone. But I think also stress, is a huge component, especially what you guys mentioned earlier. We're not meant to be sitting in front of a computer screen all day with blue light, not having our bodies in motion, not being in sunlight. And all of that, I think, stresses us out, and we don't even realize how stressed we are. And stress also affects your digestion and your health as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my last major flare up, I was telling Harry this, was in 2016. And then this summer, as we've been building out everything with the Meat Mafia, I've been on a ton of planes. I haven't been sleeping a lot. I've been traveling. I was working a tech sales job up till a few months ago. So I'm trying to balance all these things, and I'm feeling stressed out. And I'm starting to notice that my stomach it was starting to flare up a little bit again. And that for me is my indicator of like, okay, we have to let's get back to sleeping 8 hours. Let's focus on a meditation practice. Let's be really strict with the diet. But to your point, it's like that intrinsic understanding of what's going on with your body, as opposed to just blanket taking a pill that's treating the stomach, then it's probably going to give me some other long-term health issue.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point too. And I kind of think about it as proof of work, where we have this instant gratification mentality where we want the fix overnight. But the truth is, this is like a pattern. It's like habits that you build over time, and your body is not meant to just, lose 15 pounds in a week. You're supposed to develop habits that are healthy, that you can keep in the long term, and changes don't happen very easily, right? You have to establish the right type of behavior and keep it over time. You don't just want to lose weight that quickly and take a pill, because ultimately that's not going to be healthy. And yet we have this desire to just do everything really, really fast, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think like this idea of making everything cheap and convenient is at the core of all the problems with the food system and healthcare system. People want things to be easy. And if we can facilitate that through a pill or some borderline lies that we can tell people that this magic pill or magic surgery is going to fix your weight loss or your heart condition, whatever it is, it's easier to do that than try to change their lifestyle, because lifestyle changes do take personal autonomy and ownership. And you have to wake up every day with the empowerment to live in accordance to that lifestyle. So it's much harder for these doctors to actually feel confident in prescribing lifestyle changes because they don't have nearly as much control over it.
You also don't make money off of that, right?
Yeah, and they don't make money off
Someone
it.
going to the gym and being healthy and going out to get sunlight, that's not going to make the pharmaceutical companies any money.
Yeah. We had an awesome doctor on our podcast, Dr. Phil Avadia, who's a heart surgeon, and he lost a ton of weight through an animal-based carnivore diet. And his book is called Stay Off My Operating Table. So he's basically now steering everyone away from his surgery business and trying to get people more focused on what they're putting in their body. And so he now has a telemedicine business where he's helping people reverse diabetes through lifestyle changes, which I think is, that to me is the path forward. And if we can marry some of these concepts of Bitcoin with people who are thinking about really moving the needle with telemedicine and getting people access to high quality medical care, because neither Brett or myself are anti-medicine. It's just this institutionalization of like this whole system really just drives people to be unhealthy. And so, I think at the core of it, it's really what Dr. Phil is kind of promoting.
Well, so if people are watching or listening to this and they do maybe want to lose weight and get healthier, is it more important what you eat or how much you exercise, or is it totally 50-50?
Ooh,
I know where I stand on this one.
Yeah, I think that we both are. I think that controlling the food that goes in your body and being able to cook your meals is like probably the most important lever that you can possibly pull. Okay. Harry's got a great story where basically, he put on some weight working a corporate job, and all he started with was cooking his own meals, which made a huge impact. So Harry, maybe you could tell that story.
Yeah. So at the beginning of COVID, I was getting a lot more intentional about what I was doing with my health. And I'd kind of like lost like 5-10 pounds. But I had put on not a bunch of weight, but like I was not the athlete I once used to be. I'll put it that way. And, I was really just trying to figure out like, okay, I need to get back to square one here. So COVID hit, I got a lot of time allotted back to me. And I was like, I'm just going to hit the reset button on some of my like core habits. I'm just going to start cooking all my meals. Gyms were closed, so I didn't have access to a gym. So my only physical activity that I was doing was going for long walks and then really just focusing on eating a clean diet and controlling the input. So that diet looked very much like an animal-based diet. It was high in fat, high in protein, and low in carbs. And I got in the best shape that I've been in a very, very long time just through kind of simplifying things. And that is not a money-making message, but that I think is the cold, hard truth that people need to hear, is that you can do it. You just need to simplify it and act on it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And it does go back to the idea of personal choice and your own habits and behavior, because I know that there are a lot of people out there who during the pandemic, when the lockdowns happened, they were at home, they just started eating and drinking more than they usually were, and maybe things that weren't unhealthy, and they got in worse shape. And then there are people on the other side, including myself, where I made like a home gym. I was cooking all my foods. I got in better shape actually because of the pandemic and not being out and about and stressed out as much, all over the place running around. So, but that's all about choice. And it comes down to making those choices individually on a daily basis and making it a consistent habit, because you can't just do it for a week, eat healthy for a week, and then, consume a bunch of junk and then expect there to be actual progress.
For whatever reason, consistency has become unsexy in Western culture, and I'm not really sure why that's the case. We could probably spend a whole other hour talking about that, but I think you make such a good point where it's not a trade-off as much as it's a simple choice. It's the choice to DoorDash your food versus going to Whole Foods and prepping your ingredients. It's a choice to eat this versus actual like nutrient dense animal products. It's a choice to take a cab in versus maybe walk like a mile and a half to your restaurant. It's all these choices that compound day and day again. And when you're doing things the right way, it doesn't feel like this white knuckling restrictive thing. It genuinely feels fun and enjoyable. Like people that are eating animal dense products, like really good quality food from your local farmer that's like loaded with butter and good quality sea salt and, great grass-fed products. It's so delicious and so nourishing, and your body is absorbing that. And then you're going out and maybe you're just starting with like walking 5,000 to 10,000 steps a day. And next thing you know, you look in the mirror, like you're starting to notice that you have abs, or you feel better, your brain fog goes away, or your anxiety goes away. And then you have all the motivation that you need to keep going. And you kind of embed it into this like holistic style. It's not this like, get 6-minute abs or just don't eat. It's, it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. It's supposed to be part of your life.
Completely. Well, I know that there are a lot of directions we can take this, but I want to ask something because, we talked about soy, we talked about corn, we talked about meat. You guys had like a viral tweet about how chickens have changed and changed sizes and how unhealthy they are, and pharmaceuticals. If there's one area of food and health that really makes your blood boil, like if you could address one thing, one product, one crop, one thing that you could change so that America or the world is healthier, what's the thing that really makes you angry and passionate? What's the one thing you want to change? I'm
curious to see what Brett says, but I'll go first. I think for me, it has to be the seed oil conversation. I don't think it's being blown up into hyperbole, like by any means. I think these people who are sounding the alarm on seed oils are spot on. They're really inflammatory for people to consume. They're high in linoleic acid. They are not evolutionarily consistent to what we've eaten in the past. And I think they cause a host of these chronic diseases that we're seeing pop up, these autoimmune diseases pop up. But then on the other side of that, so we agree that they're bad for humans, but they're also terrible for the environment. And, a lot of the subsidies that we see from the government promoting in agriculture are going towards these seed oils being created and supporting that entire industry. And a lot of these seed oils are just in a lot of these highly processed foods, these packaged goods that we see in the inner aisles of the grocery store. So it's just, they're so pervasive that I think it's hard to not say that one, just because it's a subtly small, thing on a food label, but it's massive. The impact of it is massive.
Well, isn't all of our food cooked in it at restaurants? Because honestly, I was thinking about this. I'm totally on board with what you said. And I go to restaurants and I'm like, okay, there's a special menu if you don't eat gluten or if you're whatever, you're allergic to this, that. Why can't we have restaurants or menus where it's no seed oils? I'm allergic to seed oils. Like I've started to say that actually at restaurants. And I ask people if they can cook my food in butter, and half of them look at me like I'm a crazy person. But I'm also in Los Angeles, so a lot of people have crazy diets here. So I feel like I can tell people to, shove it with their seed oils.
Yeah, there's a great app that just came out called Seed Oil Scout that will give you a GPS rundown.
Really?
Yeah, of all the restaurants in your area, and it will let you know which ones are safe, which ones cook with tallow or butter versus margarine and seed oils and things like that. It's still in the developmental stages, but like for cities like New York and LA and Austin, I think he's built it out a decent amount, and it's a great starting point. But I think too, being able to like have the courage to ask your waiter to cook things in butter and ghee and tallow, like, that's an amazing step in the right direction. The problem is that, these restaurants are, unfortunately, they're so low margin that they're optimizing for cost. Yeah. And then we've had a couple of restaurant owners tell us that like the FDA, like they're literally being told to cook with seed oils as well. And also there are all these like, they might think that they're cooking with butter, but it's really this like butter margarine combination. So the waiter or waitress thinks that they're serving you butter, but it's like, it's laced with seed oils or margarine or something like that. So that's why it's like, you want to be a normal human and you want to eat out. And I think it's possible to hold these conflating beliefs that like, you should be trying to cook as many of your meals as possible and eat these evolutionarily consistent meals. But if you go out and try and eat as well as you possibly can, and you do get laced with seed oils every once in a while, like the body is also very resilient too. And like, you shouldn't just never eat out or enjoy these social experiences because you're so worried about, getting laced or something like that. It really does come down
moderation. Well,
moderation.
Well, Brett, what's your thing? What's the thing that makes you the angriest and that you'd want to change?
I think just the aversion to animal products, in particular with our kids, and optimizing for convenience with food preparation. So like what I mean by that is, it's very near and dear to me just because I'm from New Jersey and I lived in New York for 3 years. New York City, the public school system, they have 2 days out of the week where they no longer have lunches with meat in them. I think it's meatless Mondays, and then it's either called plant-based Fridays or vegan Fridays. And unfortunately, the mayor of New York, Mayor Eric Adams, he's like a diehard plant-based advocate, even though he's gotten caught eating fish and other things like that. So he's really more like pescatarian. But we're starting to see this almost like this epidemic of like pushing our dietary preferences on what our children should be eating and pushing those on our kids, which is really concerning considering all the studies that are showing, positive correlation between saturated fat consumption and healthy cognitive development and mental health. So you're seeing this stuff being pushed onto our kids. And it's really concerning, and living in a world where it's like you're sending your kid home with Lunchables, which is the worst of the worst. Some of these things you need like a freaking Venn diagram to be able to decipher all the ingredients. That's probably the biggest thing that gets me frustrated, and seeing that, like we were saying, 40% of our children are overweight or obese, and they're getting fatty liver disease purely because of sugar consumption. You just wonder, what is that going to lead to in future generations, knowing how good the three of us and the listener feels when they take control of their diet, and knowing that our kids might not have the ability to do the similar things for themselves.
Have you guys seen the movie Where to Invade Next? It's a documentary.
No.
It's okay. So it's a Michael Moore documentary, and so some people might have different views, but I'm I kind of am jaded and skeptical of politicians on both sides. So whatever your thoughts are, this is actually a really interesting documentary, and he goes to different countries and he looks at things that are just done in a different way than the US, or done better, where they're healthier or, more prosperous, whatever. And he goes to France and he visits a elementary school in France, where instead of in the US, where you have like a 20 or 30-minute lunch and everyone's scarfing down foods that are laced with preservatives and fake stuff, you get an hour for lunch, and there's a chef that cooks a different homemade, farmers market driven meal for these little kids, these little French kids. And they sit there and they have plenty of time, and they have actual silverware, and they learn how to cut their food and eat it slowly and have a conversation. They have these round tables, and the menu changes every single day based on what's fresh and what's seasonal. And it's so adorable. You see these like little kids, and they're learning how to cut and like converse across the table and be social, but also eat really healthy food, with meat and like a variety of things. And I just thought, oh my gosh, you would never see that here in the States. And if you did, it would cost a fortune at some private school. And there it was obviously at a public school, it's obviously a more socialized system, but it does, you think about like the kids and where they start, and then they have those habits, and then they're addicted because that food you crave more, right? Like there's an element to the cereals that you eat and the things that are in the boxes with the preservatives and the chemicals. Your body gets used to them and kind of craves them more, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. We had a guy on our podcast, Mike Collins, he's the sugar-free man. He talks about addiction all the time. And he raised his kids so that they, even prenatal, they were like, when they were in the womb, his wife wasn't even consuming carbs, so that the kids would not have this almost addictive relationship with carbohydrates. I mean, you don't necessarily need to take it to that extreme, but I do think it's a good example of, we are biologically engineered to react to dopamine, and carbohydrates do release that dopamine release that kind of drives behavior. So when you're talking about, okay, foods that are going to influence your behavior, the highly addictive ones, the ones that are loaded with sugar, salt, and fat, those magic three ingredients, like, that's going to change how your habits for the rest of your life.
But I was actually going to mention that, because with fat, if it's real fat and if it's animal based, it makes you feel full when it should, right? One thing that I think that more people should educate themselves on, and what I hope to raise attention with through having you guys on and just mentioning this on the show, is when you eat the stuff that's fake and has a ton of artificial ingredients and chemicals, it doesn't send that signal to your brain to say you're full. And I think that that's one of the biggest issues driving obesity, is people are constantly eating when they don't actually need the energy and the calories, because they're not getting that signal that they're full, that real food actually gives you, where you feel satiated and you stop and you're ready for your next activity. Do you guys know anything about that, or can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think an amazing exercise to do that I will sometimes do, honestly, is like, If you're going to go for like a bag of chips or something like that, just ask yourself, you're like, am I actually hungry? Does my body actually want this, or am I eating just to eat?
Yeah.
And I think to your point with the industrial food system is these foods are so hyper palatable. And like Harry mentioned, these scientists that are creating the product, they know the perfect combinations to offset each other to make them as addictive as possible. So you literally cannot stop eating them.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we hear when people switch to this real foods diet is it almost feels like you have a superpower because you're eating something that's high in saturated fat, which is very calorically and nutrient dense. And then you don't feel like you need to eat for 6 to 8 hours. So it's like when the donuts or the pizza comes out in your 9 to 5, you don't feel this urge to grab them because you're on this constant spike of glucose and carbohydrates throughout your day. You kind of just have this consistent burn of energy, which is amazing. So a lot of people, they feel this constant hunger and this constant need to just grab food, which is always around them. Whereas when you switch to real foods that are high in saturated fat, there's this nutrient density that comes to that just keeps you full for a while. So it's very simple. It's like I eat when I'm hungry, and then when I don't eat, that's it. It's like it's a very simple yes, no decision.
Love that. Well, I can talk to you guys for hours. I'm so glad that I had a chance to have you on. Where I love to leave it is kind of news you can use. I have viewers and listeners all over the world. Some are here in the US, in big cities, small towns, some are in different countries. Wherever you are, what's the best advice if you want to start to get healthier, to eat more local, or get to know maybe the farmers, ranchers in your community? Like what should people do to become healthier?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a lot of stuff, but something that resonates really well with me is just starting small and not trying to change everything at once. So for me, that would look like going and connecting with a local food source that's creating really high quality food, and start having conversations on a weekly basis with someone who's actually going and putting the energy into making food.
How do you find them? How do you find them?
So, Brett, is it eatwild.com?
It's eatwild.com. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a great website called eatwild.com. It's a resource that has tons of great farms out there that are doing things the right way. Another great resource would be Weston A. Price. They have a ton of resources, whether it's finding raw milk or finding a local farmer. That's another great spot to check out. So, I would start with those two websites, find someone locally, and just start having the conversation. And I think the next step would be start cooking all your meals. Once you start controlling all the inputs, you'll start to really gain an appreciation for everything that you're putting in your body and what it really means to fuel yourself.
Awesome. Brett?
It's very simple, right? It's like, I love the concept of, to build off of what Harry says, like we like to create challenges and things like that. And I think something that's pretty cool and pretty powerful is just for 2 weeks straight, cook as many of your meals as you possibly can and try and walk 10,000 steps a day. And by cooking our meals, we mean real foods. So, meat, fish, eggs, fruits, vegetables, some dairy, some yogurt, some honey, and just very simply walk 10,000 steps a day. And I would be shocked if someone doesn't feel better just by making those two changes. Like it's literally that simple. Like Harry had mentioned, like he was he was working a corporate job and got himself out of shape, starts cooking all of his meals. And then a few months later, he's building up to doing a full Ironman. And it's like, he's not going to jump right into that, but it's like this constant progression that comes from taking control of the food that you put into your system. And then just trusting that the body is so resilient. We're meant to be able to thrive and be metabolically healthy and have great relationships and live this kick-ass life. Like that's why we're so passionate about this. And the three of us know how good it feels when you actually make the commitment to cooking well. It's like you have more energy, you do better at your job. You want to connect with more people. It's literally like a priceless investment. And I would just encourage everyone that's listening. It's like, you deserve to have that same feeling too. And you're perfectly capable of doing it just by starting with some of the small things that we talked about during this hour.
It's so true. It's the fuel, it's the energy that you live your life by. So you have to take care of it. I love it. I love talking to you guys. You guys are going to have a farm, right? Do you have your cows yet?
Soon enough. We're moving out in 2 weeks. So we got to start making some plans.
All right. Well, I'm definitely going to visit. Thank you both so much. How can people find you?
Yeah. So the best place to find us is on Twitter. My handle's @CarniClemenza. Brett's is at Mr. Salazzo. But then we also have a Substack and our podcast. So, and our YouTube channel and Instagram channels as well. Those are both the Meat Mafia Podcast. So those are the best places to get in touch with us.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you so much for checking out this show. Again, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any new content. And I love to hear your feedback. Leave a comment or send me an email at natalie@talkingbitcoin.com. Let me know what you think, if you have guest suggestions, and I'll see you next time.